Whenever you ask people who the strongest Straw Hats are, they will without any doubt tell you Luffy and Zoro. But Sanji? Well, there's some really intense debates going on about how strong he actually is, so to end the Sanji hate once and for all, let's give him the perfect devil fruit for him to take him into the top tier of fighters in the story. Which just leaves us with one very important question. Which devil fruit is the best one for Sanji? And let's start with one of the coolest devil fruits in the story, which is the ice fruit. And to really explain why these chilly powers are simply one of the best devil fruit fits for Sanji, we have to break down exactly what makes our curly eyebrow chef so special. For example, that one of Sanji's main passions is of course cooking, so his perfect devil fruit would definitely need to somehow at least contribute to his cooking skills as well, I think. And the ice devil fruit would absolutely help Sanji as a chef, because what cook doesn't need a way to keep their food refrigerated? He's basically his own freezer, and on top of that, being able to actually control temperatures has a ton of applications as a chef, as you can make special dishes by being able to instantly freeze food. But what's of course even more special here is that it is one of the only devil fruits that can literally create water, so that the Straw Hats would simply never run out of water with Sanji being around them. And so all around, pretty strong in just the cooking category. But on top of that, we of course also have to consider how this devil fruit would improve his no-hands fighting style as well. And of course, the Sanji that we know post Wano already has a super strong durable body and quite incredible strength, but the ice fruit would give him huge boosts in defense and attack power very early in the story, which could make him nearly unstoppable in basically every one of his main fights. Plus, the ice fruit would insanely enhance Sanji's kicking-based combat as well. He could just make his legs super cold, which could freeze anyone he touches. He could also add icy blades to his kicks, or even combine his natural fire powers with these new ice abilities to kind of be the ultimate hot and cold fighter. Plus, of course, he could shoot out ice projectiles and even freeze water itself, so that the Straw Hats never have to worry about drowning ever again. Plus, I'm pretty sure that he could just tag team with Nami to create some truly insane weather-based attacks by creating cold air for Nami to manipulate as well. And so right out of the gate, you might be thinking that this already must be the perfect fruit for Sanji, but we actually have many more fruits that might be even way better fits for the Straw Hat chef, including the one that he dreamed about as a child. And that's of course the 𝙻𝚎𝚐𝚗𝚍 𝚤 right here, otherwise known as the Invisibility Fruit. And for many people, this is the first power that they probably think of when it comes to giving Sanji a devil fruit. And that's because during the Thriller Bark arc, we learned from Sanji himself that he always wanted to eat this fruit ever since he was a child because of, well, rather perverted reasons. And honestly, if that was all that Sanji used this fruit for, then he probably wouldn't live a very long life with the Straw Hats, because I'm pretty sure that Nami would just straight up kill him for peeping on her in the shower. But let's assume that he could actually control himself when it came to the ladies, or be really good at hiding himself, and seriously evaluate this fruit as a fighting option for Sanji as well. Because first off, the invisibility powers for obvious reasons are incredibly useful in combat, as he can hide from most opponents. In fact, he already got a literal invisibility power-up in Wano with his family's technology, but instead he actually chose to destroy his invisible suit in the end. Not that it really mattered though, because at this point Sanji moves so fast that he is basically already invisible, and so that power really would again just be a huge buff for early story Sanji. Besides that, the fruit wouldn't really be all that useful for Sanji outside of that, since it doesn't make him technically any stronger. It also doesn't help with his cooking much, except for maybe keeping his dishes a surprise, I guess. So overall, I don't really think that this fruit is all that great as a serious option for Sanji, but one that we had to discuss nonetheless. But this next fruit here might actually be the best fruit for Chef Sanji, at least, because we all know that a knife is a chef's best friend. So of course, any chef would simply love to get the dice fruit, which, in case you forgot, allows its user to turn any part of their their body into a blade. Which honestly is just absolutely perfect for Sanji, since he is constantly slicing and dicing food in the kitchen. But beyond just simple knives, he could also turn himself into so many different kinds of blades that are just useful in the kitchen, such as a spinning blade to use as a blender or a rough blade to act as a grater. So clearly, this fruit has truly endless uses in the kitchen. Beyond that though, it is also pretty perfect with Sanji's fighting style, because he can just turn his entire leg into a sword and use that to attack his enemies, which honestly would make him even more deadly than he already is. In particular, this fruit would have probably helped Sanji a ton during his brief clash with Doflamingo, because if we assume that at this point Sanji is pretty good with using his devil fruit and has decent levels of Haki as well, then there's literally no better power to fight Doflamingo's strings than a bunch of blades. So who knows, there might not have even been the entirety of the Dressrosa arc if Sanji just had this devil fruit. However, I do have to admit that it would be a little bit weird to see Sanji using blades, since that has always been, of course, Zoro's thing. Plus, you can just imagine Sanji doing this to his captain with blade legs. Yikes. That would be a bye-bye to Luffy. Although, on the other hand, I guess you could say that Sanji and Zoro could take their rivalry to the absolutely next level by dueling with their blades. But if we're being honest here though, Sanji would need a ton of practice to actually learn how to use this fruit properly, which he actually wouldn't need if he ate this next devil fruit. And before you laugh right here, just know that this is my personal favorite fruit for Sanji, which is the bighorn sheep devil fruits that we created right here. And while this fruit, yes, is currently not actually a thing in the story, the inspiration for this power actually comes from chapter 651 with its color spread here, where we see all of the Straw Hats as animals. And honestly, I just think that this is so cool and weirdly awesome to look at, but if you think about it, being a bighorn sheep could actually be a huge fighting boost for Sanji. Because in case you didn't know, these animals are truly insane. They're known for their incredible jumping and balance, which basically allows them to climb entire cliffs that seem to be completely smooth by jumping up to 20 feet high and then landing on the tiniest ledges. Which of course does mean that for Sanji, who attacks mostly with jumps and kicks, adding this natural boost to his leg power would make him even more powerful than he already is. Now, of course, this is also a zone devil fruit in general, so Sanji would also get quite a few natural boosts in all of his physical stats like strength, speed, endurance, and recovery. Plus, on top of that, he gets the hybrid and full zone forms as well, which surprisingly might change his fighting style quite a bit as well. Because I mean, one of his biggest rules is to never fight using his hands, but if he has these massive horns on his heads or hoofs as hands, he would basically have to use them, right? However, the one downside to this fruit is that it doesn't really have any real applications for Sanji as a cook, so while it would be awesome and really fun to see, probably isn't the best fruit for Sanji as a cook. Which you could say is the exact opposite case of this next fruit here, which is the cook fruit that we were introduced to during the Whole Cake Island arc. Now, in case you don't remember, because this was kind of a minor character, this fruit basically allows you to turn anything into food. For example, this guy who actually ate this fruit turned this log of wood into a slice of meat, and he later turned Big Mom's entire castle into a gigantic sponge cake. And so of course we do have to discuss this fruit here, because it does seem like an absolute perfect fit for a chef like Sanji, right? Well, I'm here to tell you no, because this fruit would just destroy the Sanji that we know and love. For one, this is basically like a cheat code for a chef, since you literally don't even need to cook to make any food. And so for someone like Sanji, who takes a ton of pride in his cooking, he would likely feel like he'd rather cook something incredible on his own rather than just instantly making food with his devil fruit. Or alternatively, if he actually ate this fruit as a kid and then relied on it for his cooking, he might have actually never gotten to be the incredible chef that he is today. Plus, we aren't even entirely sure how good the food made by this fruit tastes. I mean, Big Mom certainly didn't like the taste of the cake made from the fruit, so it's possible that the food doesn't taste good at all. Although, to be fair, it's very possible that the quality of the food produced by this fruit probably also depends on the skill of the user and the situation, so food made in an emergency probably wouldn't be as good as something made with time and preparation. And to be completely fair, this is literally the perfect fruit to have on a ship if you start running out of food, like what happened to the crew on the way to Whole Cake Islands. However, of course, I have very serious doubts about Sanji actually using the cooked fruit in combat, because the only way I could see Sanji using it in a fight is to turn other people's weapons or maybe even other people into food. Like, for example, if he was fighting a swordsman, Sanji could probably turn his opponent's sword into, I don't know, a banana or something, which would seriously weaken his opponent. But if we're being honest, it is a kind of weak combat ability compared to the other powers that we've already mentioned and the insane ones coming up next. Because even though the cooked fruit was not a great fit for Sanji, there actually is a food-based devil fruit that is a way better fit for him. And that is the arguably strongest food fruit that we know about so far, which is 𝙻𝚎𝚐𝚗𝚣's Mochi Devil Fruit, which would be absolutely perfect if we had to pick a food-based devil fruit for Sanji. That's because this so-called special Paramecia devil fruit has nearly all the benefits of a Logia fruit, with the added benefit being that the substance Sanji could turn into is also edible. And so it's both great for combat and in the kitchen. Well, let's break it down. Of course, for one, with Mochi, Sanji could make an endless supply of Mochi-based treats, so in theory, the crew would never go hungry, which is a major bonus for this fruit already. However, since Sanji can turn his entire body into Mochi as well and produce the sticky sweet substance too, he gets a major boost in all of his combat moves as well. For example, as we saw when Big Mom's strongest son 𝙻𝚎𝚐𝚐 used this devil fruit, Sanji would be able to create Mochi projectiles and take out opponents from far away. He could also enhance his kicks with Mochi by making his legs extra strong and even extending their reach. So yeah, this is pretty much an optimal fruit if we're combining his role as a chef and a fighter. However, even the Mochi fruit simply cannot compare, of course, to the incredible powers of the Pika Pika no Mi, also better known as the light fruit. And I mean, this fruit regularly ranks near the top strongest devil fruits on any list, and for very good reasons. For one, since this fruit is a Logia, Sanji would get the very obvious benefits of being able to turn his entire body into light and shoot out light lasers as well. And really, there's almost no better fruit to enhance Sanji's fighting style than by making him even faster than he already is. Because I mean, we've already seen just how devastatingly fast Sanji was during the Wano arc, but this devil fruit would take him to a whole different level. And on top of just making him faster, Sanji would also be able to shoot laser light beams, although as with many of these devil fruits, it's kind of questionable if Sanji would ever use a long-ranged attack like this. I mean, we've actually seen him pull out a gun twice in the story, but he's never fired a single bullet. So would he shoot out light bullets with his devil fruit? It's kind of debatable for sure, but as long as he's not using his hands, I do feel like Sanji could do it. And so yeah, without any doubt, this fruit, no matter who eats it honestly, would be a true monster for combat, but how about using it in the kitchen? Well, in order to effectively use light for cooking, Sanji would need incredible, and I mean incredible, precise control over these powers. But if he could actually manage to master that fruit, he could use his light to heat up and actually cook food, since light heats up objects as it passes through them. So much like the Ice Devil fruit, this could lead to some fancy new cooking techniques that I'm pretty sure Sanji would absolutely love to test out. But there's of course one thing that the light fruit wouldn't do for Sanji, and that is get rid of his #1 weakness. Of course, I'm talking about the fact that Sanji still refuses to fight women, which has cost him pretty badly on more than just one occasion in the story. However, to counter this exact weakness, there are actually 2 fruits that would help Sanji never have to fight a woman ever again. And I'm of course talking about this person's hormone fruit, which can inject someone with enough hormones to make them switch genders. And I mean, I guess that would be one option, and the other one involves a brief manga spoiler here, but we also have this guy's 𝙻𝚎𝚐𝚐𝚗𝚍 fruit, which can actually infect people with a gender-swapping disease. And technically, both of these would allow Sanji to change women into men so that he would have no problem fighting them, which basically takes away his biggest weakness as a fighter right now. Although, knowing Sanji, he would probably never want to change a woman into a man, so maybe these aren't too great for him after all. And so even with all of these incredible devil fruits that we've picked so far, I still wonder if we couldn't just craft the perfect fruit for Sanji that would put him on the same levels as even Luffy or Zoro. And since these two are both essentially gods, I mean, Luffy is literally the sun god and Zoro has his Ashura demon powers as well, I did figure why not try and give Sanji some sort of mythical god powers as well. And so after doing some research, I actually found out that there is a Japanese deity called 𝚬𝚤 who is the god of food, which of course just sounds absolutely perfect for Sanji because 𝚬𝚤 is said to be able to create any kind of food or even help crops to grow better. Now that is obviously a major plus in the chef category since Sanji could produce any ingredient that he could imagine to create some truly out of this world recipes. Like seriously, Sanji would be in heaven, especially since his dream of finding the All Blue specifically mentions cooking with some special fish that you can't find anywhere else in the world. So yeah, this fruit would be perfect for Chef Sanji, but fighting is a whole nother matter though, because at first it doesn't seem like this fruit would have like any real effect on his fighting style, and you might actually think that with his endless supply of ingredients, Sanji could just whip up some deadly dishes to poison his opponents, but I truly don't think that Sanji would ever want to make food that would hurt someone. And so let's actually flip this around and imagine that with enough practice, Sanji could make food that actually boosts his own strength, endurance, recovery, or some other characteristic that he chooses. For example, I'm just imagining him getting ready to fight by taking a bite of some sort of special strength boosting meal or something like that, which would be perfect to share obviously also with other people like the other Straw Hats, although I don't really know if he would share with Zoro here, but this fruit might even be enough to settle their age-old rivalry once and for all. However, of course, this is only considering Zoro at his current actual strength in the story, but it would be a completely different story if Zoro had his own devil fruit to actually compete with Sanji's. And if you want to see which devil fruit is the perfect one for our green-haired swordsman here, you can watch that video right here as well. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.